Imagine you hire a builder to construct your house. He cuts corners, uses cheap materials, and 6 months later the roof caves in and kills someone. What happens? He gets sued. Maybe he goes to prison. Now rewind nearly 4,000 years. In ancient Babylon, that same builder would be executed. No trial by jury, no appeals court. Death. That was the law, and it was carved in stone for everyone to see. Welcome back to the history of economic thought. In our last episode, we explored how Mesopotamian debt spiraled out of control, how lenders enslaved entire families, how interest compounded until whole communities collapsed under the weight of what they owed. We ended with a question: what happens when an economy tears itself apart? Today, we get the answer. Because one king looked at the chaos and decided, enough. The state is stepping in. His name was Hammurabi, and he ruled Babylon from roughly 1792 to 1750 BCE. When he took the throne, Babylon was a minor city-state. By the time he died, it was an empire stretching across most of Mesopotamia. But Hammurabi's most lasting achievement wasn't military conquest. It was a slab of black stone. The Code of Hammurabi, a diorite stele standing 2¼ meters tall, now housed in the Louvre in Paris. At the top, a carved relief shows Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god of justice, receiving divine authority to govern. Below that image, nearly 300 laws written in Akkadian cuneiform, covering everything from murder to marriage to, and this is what matters to us, the economy. Let's start with wages. Hammurabi didn't just suggest what people should earn, he specified it. A field laborer was entitled to 8 gur of grain per year, an ox driver 6 gur, a herdsman 8 gur. These weren't guidelines, they were law, and they varied by profession because the code recognized that different work had different value. A doctor treating a gentleman could charge 5 shekels of silver. That same doctor treating a freedman, 3 shekels. Treating a slave, the slave's owner paid 2 shekels. Was this fair? By modern standards, absolutely not. But it was systematic, it was codified, and it was almost 4,000 years ago. Now remember the debt crisis from episode 2. Hammurabi had a solution: interest rate caps. Grain loans were capped at 20%, silver loans at 33⅓%. And here's the part that still feels radical today. If a creditor charged above the legal rate, he didn't just pay a fine, he forfeited the entire debt. The borrower owed nothing. That's not a slap on the wrist, that's a nuclear deterrent aimed directly at predatory lending. But Hammurabi went further than just capping rates. He put a time limit on debt slavery itself. If you couldn't pay what you owed, yes, you or your family members could be seized by the creditor and forced to work, but only for 3 years. After that, freedom, regardless of whether the debt was paid off. Compare that to the world before the code, where debt slavery could last a lifetime, could swallow generations. 3 years was a limit on creditor power that wouldn't appear again in many societies for centuries. What really surprises people is the commercial law. This wasn't just about protecting peasants from loan sharks. The code contained sophisticated rules for business. Partnerships had to be formalized with written contracts, and profits and losses were shared according to agreed terms. If you entrusted goods to an agent, and that agent was robbed while traveling, the agent had to swear an oath and was cleared of liability. The merchant bore the loss. There were even provisions for what we'd now call shipping insurance. If a merchant's goods were lost to pirates or storms, the state absorbed the loss. Nearly 4 millennia before Lloyd's of London, Babylon had a system for managing commercial risk. Warehouse receipts were another innovation embedded in the code. If you deposited grain in a public storehouse, you received a receipt, a written record of your deposit that could be used in transactions. These were, in a very real sense, among the earliest financial instruments. Not coins, not bills, clay tablets that represented stored value. Then there were the price controls on essential goods. Renting an ox for threshing? The code set the rate. Hiring a boat? Fixed price. Agricultural labor during harvest season? Standardized. But, and this is important, not everything was controlled. The code focused on staple goods and essential services. Luxury items, artisan crafts, goods that weren't critical to daily survival. Those were left to the market. Hammurabi wasn't trying to plan the entire economy. He was intervening where he believed unchecked markets caused the most harm. That distinction, regulate necessities, leave luxuries alone, is a policy debate we're still having today. Now let's talk about the part everyone remembers. The consequences. A house builder whose shoddy construction killed the homeowner. Put to death. If the collapse killed the homeowner's son, the builder's son was executed instead. A surgeon whose bronze lancet killed a patient during an operation. His hand was cut off. These weren't just punishments. They were incentive structures. They made the cost of failure so catastrophic that competence wasn't optional. It was survival. Before you dismiss this as barbaric, consider the logic. There were no licensing boards, no malpractice insurance, no building inspectors. How do you ensure quality when you have no regulatory infrastructure? You make the penalty for failure so severe that self-regulation becomes a matter of life and death. It's crude, yes, but it's also internally coherent. And modern building codes, consumer protection agencies, medical licensing, these are the civilized descendants of exactly this principle. The code also reveals something uncomfortable. It was explicitly stratified. Babylonian society was divided into three classes: the awalim, or free citizens of the upper class, the mushkinim, a lower class of free persons, and the wardam, slaves. The law applied differently depending on which class you belonged to. An injury to a nuwilim demanded greater compensation than the same injury to a mushkinim. A slave's life was valued in property terms, not human terms. Different rules for different people based on social rank. We can condemn it, and we should. But we should also recognize how remarkably honest it was. Most societies throughout history have applied different economic rules to different classes. Hammurabi's code was simply upfront about it. So what's the big picture here? Hammurabi's code represents the first comprehensive attempt by a state to regulate economic life, not through informal custom, not through ad hoc royal decrees, through a systematic, public, written, legal framework that anyone could see. Literally, the stele was erected in a public place for all to read. The message was clear. These rules come from the gods, through the king, and they apply to everyone. Economic regulation was presented not as arbitrary interference, but as divine justice. And the modern echoes are everywhere. Minimum wage laws, Hammurabi set wages, interest rate caps, Hammurabi capped interest, consumer protection, Hammurabi executed negligent builders, bankruptcy discharge, the idea that at some point a debt is forgiven and you start over. Hammurabi freed debt slaves after 3 years. We didn't invent these ideas. We inherited them. We refined them. But the impulse, the belief that markets need rules, that the powerful need constraints, that the state has a role in economic life, that impulse is nearly 4,000 years old. Next time on the History of Economic Thought, we leave Mesopotamia and travel south to the banks of the Nile. Ancient Egypt took a completely different approach to managing an economy. No interest rate caps, no commercial courts. Instead, they built something extraordinary. A grain banking system that turned wheat into money and made the pharaoh the central banker of an entire civilization. Episode 4. Coming soon.